As I performed a solo production, I obviously had to direct myself whilst also thinking about the music, the lighting, and the sound. Tabletop theatre is quite minimalistic, but the characters displayed by objects. When casting, I had to think about key characters from the show, as well as what would display them without being too over the top or ambiguous, as Tim Etchell says in his interview with Dan Rebelato. If the shapes weren't humanoid or they were too nebulous a shape, we'd just get rid of them. Characters must have a firm presence in their objecthood. And I tried to employ this tact when choosing my cast. I went for 3 Trilby hats to show the different characters that old Arthur Kipps plays in The Woman in Black. Sam Daly, Arthur Keckwick, and his portrayal of himself. A baseball cap to depict young Kipps, a mason jar, a child's bandana, and a translucent scarf for the invisible characters of The Woman in Black herself, the woman she was before she died, and the ethereal serial killer she became, Jeanette Humphrey, and her baby that passed away, causing this series of events. I aimed to use theatre of cruelty, as I wanted the show to give my audience chills in the same way the original play had for me when I watched it. In this way, I knew I had to make my audience uncomfortable using flashing lights, random screams, 3D audio so you'd be sat at the edge of your seat, creating the tensest atmosphere possible. As I mentioned, I aimed for my play to feel like the original, and to do this I tried to keep to the themes that not only Susan Hill wrote for her book, but that Stephen Maltrat kept for his adaptation, a play within a play, of which I depicted in my performance. The main themes in the Ghost Story by Susan Hill are fear, isolation, and the influence of the past. When doing my performance, I used a moment where I pushed the cloth into the mason jar in red light to denote the death of Jeanette Humphrey and her becoming the Woman in Black. This followed the theme of fear, as I tried to do this as slowly as possible, hoping to create discomfort. And then I smashed the jar, pretended for safety, and then turned out the lights. I also used a few moments with the baseball cap alone on the table, lit dimly to depict isolation, also trying to keep to the simplicity tabletop begs. I was pleased with the overall outcome of my performance and how it was received. I had originally aimed to shock, scare, and keep the audience on their toes, which I believe went very well. By creating a soundscape, I relied heavily on its creepiness and my actions to inject fear into my performance, as well as the use of darkness. I think that these things came together much better than I had thought, especially in achieving my aim of recreating the aura of menace the Woman in Black play exudes, but also enabling me to keep to the theme of simplicity that tabletop theatre needs. Theatre group Forced Entertainment did 6 different tabletop performances directed by Tim Etchells, which he described as being as simple as possible, using plain humanoid objects and a narrator. I knew I wanted mine to be completely different to this and unique in its own right, while still residing under the tabletop umbrella. I think I achieved this by using as few characters as possible, minimizing the number of objects being used, as well as, of course, not having a narrator. This made me nervous as I wasn't sure how it sat in the tabletop category, or if it would tell the story like it was supposed to. However, my performance was received very well, and upon looking back at it, I can see a clear storyline. The soundscape, although it may have been a little too much, created more of a performance feel to the show, allowing me to act with it, which I think kept my audience captivated. Lastly, the thing that I think went best was my performance side itself. I spent a long time planning movements and the noises that would be heard to interlink with each other, but of course, planning something especially creepy comes with its own difficulties. As aforementioned, I wanted to employ the theatre of cruelty to ensure the discomfort of my audience, but Artaud spoke at length about disjointed sounds and unnatural ways of performing. He proposed removing the barrier between performers and an audience and producing mythic spectacles that would include verbal incantations, groans and screams, pulsating light effects, and oversized stage puppets and props. Using this idea, I had all the lights off in the theatre and lit the stage only by a lamp, which I could control to have the theatre pitch black for moments where there would be blood-curdling screams or creepy whispers. I even used 3D audio to have the voices or whispers move between speakers so the audience would feel as if it could be real. A big surprise to me was watching my peers' performances and understanding I was alone in my decision to create something very unique. This led to a lot of fear before getting up on stage, as I was worried that mine would now come across as ambiguous or too hard to follow, as everyone else had kept to the original narrated tabletop idea. Another surprise was that when I was rehearsing, my lamp completely lit the space I was using, but when I performed it in the theatre, it was so dark that I had to change many of my actions to be closer to the lamp so that they would actually be seen. Unfortunately, on top of this, I had also planned to have a fan create a chill in the room and blow my lighter objects across the table. However, on the night, I wasn't able to use the fan due to not only being able to use one plug, I chose to use the lamp as visibility was more important. Unfortunately, not everything I planned was able to come to fruition. I had wanted to wander around the audience in the dark theatre and brush people gently to set everyone on edge, but it was these little things that had me continually wondering, where is the line between too much and too little? In tabletop theatre, it's necessary to take into account the audience's feelings towards the objects, and if you are too rough with them and such, then the connection of the object is lost, as they become just objects, and I think I lost sight of this a little when I was performing. And we learned very quickly that if you were rough with them, they became very ordinary very quickly. I used a symbol of rings made out of paper to show a specific scene. However, upon reflection, the act of ripping them, although it gave my message, also reminded the audience that I was just using objects and took away the characterization. As aforementioned, the stage was very dark, and this meant that I was consistently worried about what the audience could see, and if my movements were being lost in the darkness, this meant that I ended up not being able to do some of the actions I had rehearsed, and I swung my lamp across the table instead of moving some of the objects in one moment, which took away a part of the story and left the soundscape to tell it for me, which I hadn't intended. I also intended for the moment when I throw the leaves to be more monumental within the play. However, I believe this was lost in the dark theatre and wasn't as dramatic as I wanted, although I know now that I should have done a more definitive action with my objects on stage. Next time, I would work more with the theatre technicians so I could have the right lighting to create the atmosphere I wanted without losing anything that's happening on stage. I would also incorporate more of my own use of words to help tell the story, as although the soundscape gave the effect I wanted, I felt like some of the storyline was lost because it wasn't as explicit as forced entertainment depicted with their tabletop performances and narrated tales. Another place I could improve upon is my actions with the objects, spending more time giving each object more character and allowing the audience to attach themselves to the characters, as I worry that in my attempt to make something unique and creepy, using the theatre of cruelty, I didn't denote well enough who the objects were supposed to be, and the feelings they would have throughout. Tim Etchell speaks at length on the idea of puppetry, and as he says, we would never think of ourselves as puppeteers. But there is something, of course, about how puppeteers treat the inanimate objects that they are dealing with, in order to give them the appearance of life or a kind of significance and presence, which I had aimed to give to my characters, but unfortunately failed on this particular task. So as this has been a large point of contention for me, I would spend more time on them in the future. One of the themes from the module that I have spoken about at length here was sound and silence, and I found that silence is a useful tool, not only in the use of theatre of cruelty and making the audience squirm, but also in distinguishing a change on stage, whether in the atmosphere or in the scene. Sound is similar in so much as I learned about how it tells a story within itself, and how it is useful to the actor in applying added layers to the dramatism. Doing this performance has enabled me to look at theatre more simply. Instead of thinking about creating the biggest scenes with the most eccentric moments, I can now think about the more intricate parts of scenes, employing, of course, the necessary tool of show don't tell, but actually thinking about what words are being said and their significance, rather than preferring to think of the importance of actions. I think There is more discipline in tabletop theatre. Having only a very small space to work with and only objects at your disposal, and forcing myself to be this discipline, I think, has matured the way I act as an actor and enabled me to explore directing in a way I never have. I've always gone for the acting roles in performances in the past, but now, having directed, albeit only myself, I have realized that this is something I very much enjoy, and know now that next time the opportunity should present itself to me, I will take it. In this vein, I have also had to really think about the technical side to performances and what goes into lighting on stage, designing each aspect of a show, and I know that in the future this will be at the forefront of my mind whilst delving into the nuances of the show.